Olá, estamos de volta com mais uma edição do programa Todas as Palavras e desta vez viemos até Dublin, na Irlanda, país com forte tradição literária. Aqui nasceram nomes tão conhecidos como James Joyce, Bram Stoker, esse mesmo, o criador de Drácula, ou ainda Samuel Beckett, imortalizado através daquela ponte. Viemos até à Dublin World Con, um dos maiores eventos dedicados à ficção científica e à fantasia, para conversar com George R. Martin, o autor das Crónicas de Gelo e Fogo, o autor da Guerra dos Tronos. Milhões de leitores em todo o mundo aguardam ansiosamente a publicação dos últimos 2 volumes das Crónicas de Gelo e Fogo, da Guerra dos Tronos. E George R. Martin não desilude e publicou nos últimos meses os primeiros 2 volumes da história dos reis Targaryen. Well, thank you, George, for accepting our invitation.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'm glad to be here.
You must be the writer that gives a lot of heart attacks to his readers.
Well, I hope not, because I need them to buy the next book. Can't have the readers dying, just the characters.
Just the
I'll kill
characters?
The characters.
No one told you that the hero must not be killed?
No, I took my lesson from Mr. Tolkien. I remember when I was a 13-year-old kid reading Fellowship of the Ring for the first time, and Gandalf dies.
Mm-hmm.
Gandalf dies. I was so shocked.
Oh my God.
Of course, he came back in the next book, but still, there was long months between books, and I thought he had done the unthinkable. Left such an impression on me that I've been killing characters ever since.
When you started, let's say, Game of Thrones, okay? When you started these books, this saga, what was the first scene? How did all this world appear to you?
It didn't appear all at once. It grew over the years. The first scene was actually chapter 1 in the first book, not the prologue, which I actually wrote later, but the chapter 1 where it's a Bran viewpoint chapter, and Bran goes out with his father and his brothers to see a deserter beheaded, and being educated in what it takes to rule. And he sees a man beheaded, and they find the direwolf pups in the summer snows. And that chapter came to me in 1991. I was actually working on another book at the time. I was very heavily involved in Hollywood, but it came to me so vividly that I put the other book aside and switched gears and wrote that chapter, and by the time I'd finished it, I knew what the next chapter had to be, and I kept working through the summer of '91. And then I actually put the book aside because Hollywood reared up again, and I had a pilot to write and produce. But I came back to it 3 years later and picked it up as if I just laid it down the day before.
So Ned Stark and Bran were the first characters?
Yes, yeah. Bran was the first viewpoint character. And, in that chapter, I introduced Ned and Jon Snow, Theon Greyjoy, Robb Stark, all of those. And the wolves, of course, the direwolf pups.
I believe Winterfell, I can say it's your favorite territory, kingdom?
It's probably, yeah. I don't like it hot. I like it cold. So,
Okay.
So I'd rather live in the north than, down there in Dorne. Although I might like Dornish food better with the hot, spicy peppers. I like those.
What was, so far, the most difficult scene to write, George?
The Red Wedding in Book 3. No
Really?
doubt about it. Storm of Swords, yeah. I have this reputation for killing characters, but
Yes, you are a thirsty
I
writer.
go very close to these characters. They become part of you, especially the viewpoint characters. And it takes me years to write these books. So you're living with these characters for years at a time. You're inside them. You're inside their skin. You're inside their heads. You're hearing their thoughts. You're hearing their dreams and desires. And when it comes time to kill them, it's actually very emotional, very difficult. And the Red Wedding, which occurs about 2/3 of the way through Storm of Swords, I could not actually write that when I came to it. I skipped over it. I wrote the whole rest of the book until everything was finished, and then I doubled back and made myself do the Red Wedding because I knew it would be very difficult to do.
It was difficult to get rid of Robb
Yes.
Stark, Catelyn Stark.
Right,
Yes.
right. And a number of their friends and associates, yeah.
But that is a crucial scene.
Yes, definitely.
I think that is a
that's a
turning
huge
point.
turning point.
Yes.
and hopefully it's one that took the readers by surprise and shocked them and dismayed them. Um, I've never liked books that were too predictable. I don't want my books to be predictable. You know, we've all encountered that. You pick up a new book, it looks promising, and then you read the first couple chapters, and you already know exactly how it's going to end. You can see it all laid out. Here's the hero. Here's the villain. This is the love interest. They don't like each other now, but they're going to like each other by the end. Eh, Sometimes fiction like that can be very enjoyable, but it's also very, very predictable. And my favorite books are the ones that take me to places that I don't realize that I'm going to until I get there, that surprise me and shock me or delight me. So that's the kind of books I try to write.
So now you wrote 2 books about the Targaryens.
Well, I only wrote one so far.
Yes, well, in Portugal they were published in 2 volumes.
Oh, were they? Oh, very good.
Okay.
Very good. Well, the 2 volumes in Portugal is 1 volume in English, and it's only half the story. I have to, in a few years from now, I have to write Fire and Blood Part 2, which is the rest of the Targaryens. The first book takes us through Aegon's conquest,
Yes.
through the regency of the boy king Aegon III, and a number of the kings in between. The second book, which is not written yet, will pick up the actual reign of Aegon III and go all the way through Robert's Rebellion.
This new book, it's written in a very different way. You almost don't have dialogues. It seems like, well, you are telling us a story.
Well, it's a history book. It's not actually a novel. It's a book of imaginary history. I love history. Popular history. I don't make any pretense to be a academic historian, but I've always loved to read historical fiction as well as fantasy and to read popular histories. There was a fantastic series in the 1950s by the English writer Thomas B. Costain. It was a 4-volume history of the Plantagenet dynasty of England and France. And when I decided to do Fire and Blood, that was the kind of the model that I had in mind. I'll do something similar to what Costain did, but with the Targaryens. And they have advantages that the Plantagenets did not have.
Dragons,
like
for
dragons,
example.
Yes. Lots and lots of dragons.
I think that these books, and Game of Thrones too, are books about power. Do you
Yes.
agree?
Definitely. Power, the uses of power, the way power does corrupt us, also the way lack of power corrupts us. You know, we all know the saying, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And there's a great deal of truth in that. But also, I find the desire for power can corrupt us. The lust for power, if you will, makes people do things that maybe they shouldn't do.
Even the people, they don't really know what they want from their leader. Do you agree with me? Because in a way, they want a strong leader, but they also want a generous leader. So it seems to me that the people don't know what he wants from a leader.
I think that's largely true today too.
Yes, well,
But yes, people have always wanted strength in the leaders. Although how you define strength is another issue. But certainly in the medieval times, they wanted leaders who were warriors, who would be victorious in war, bring plunder and glory home, and maybe that was not really the wisest of desires. You know, a king who never went to war, who was led the realm to decades of peace and prosperity, good harvests, economic growth. That would probably be better for most people. But there was this desire to, smash the enemy, to emerge victorious. We have all these medieval battles and poems and stories about the great warrior kings who distinguished themselves in combat. We don't have many stories or songs about the peaceful king who promoted good economic
Yes.
growth and issued some good laws for the protection of the people. So people back then maybe were no more wiser than people are today.
well, that's what I was asking. we are not so much different.
I think people have been, hopefully we've learned a few things with the passage of the centuries, and the societies that exist in the world today are, by and large, morally and ethically better than what we had 1,000 years ago. But it's not day and night. People are people, and we still have the same strengths, the same weaknesses, and sometimes the same fears as our ancient ancestors.
In these chronicles, Fire and Blood, there are a lot of dragons.
I love dragons.
Why?
Yes.
What the dragon represents to you?
Well, that's an interesting question. Of course, I loved dragons initially in the work of other people, reading stories about dragons when I was young. There's just something cool about dragons. And it's interesting how many societies have dragons in their mythology. And why is that? The dragons are different. Our Western dragons are very different from, say, the dragons of Asia, of China, and the kingdoms of the Far East. But they do have dragons. And what is the dragon? He was on the heraldic symbols of the Welsh. King Arthur was Arthur Pendragon. He was all tied up with the mythology of dragons. My namesake, St. George, got his sainthood by killing a dragon.
Yes.
Although if you look at the engravings, it seemed to be a very small dragon. It was about the same size as George himself in many of the statues and carvings that I've seen. Tolkien gave us Smaug, and the other great dragons of the Silmarillion, all very powerful mythical animals. So,
And in your books, they establish a very special connection with the person who rides them. It's almost.
right.
It's almost the continuation, right?
You have to bond. Yeah, you have to bond with the dragon. There's no way you can physically intimidate a dragon to obey you. I know people who ride horses. A horse is a big, powerful animal too, but we're able as riders to cow the horses, and jockeys use their whips to propel the horse and so forth. You annoy a dragon, he'll just turn his head around and roast you or bite you in half. So it takes something more than physical force. It takes this kind of psychic bond, and the precise nature of that bond is something that I'm still exploring in A World of Ice and Fire, and the novels yet to come, and also the Targaryen histories.
Yes. Why the Targaryen have this relationship, this connection with dragons?
Well, that's something you'll have to keep reading the books to find out.
Okay.
There'll be more of that in both the novels to come and in Fire and Blood to come. But the Targaryens are the last surviving noble house of the freehold of Valyria, which fell 400 years before the start of Game of Thrones in a cataclysm that
And it was
darkened the skies for.
It was their fault. The fault of Valyria.
Perhaps, yes. They had a lot of dragons, and there were a lot of rival dragon riding families. But only the Targaryens saw the doom of Valyria coming, and were able to get themselves away long enough to spare them and their beasts.
And it's interesting because the connection between the dragon and, let's say the owner. I don't know if the owner is the correct word. No.
I wouldn't say owner, rider.
Rider, okay. It's interesting because that connection can be so strong that a dragon can kill another dragon.
Yes. Yes. They're very temperamental beasts. They represent power, of course, in the books. I don't believe any more than J.R. Tolkien did in fantasy novels as allegory, but there are certain things you can look at. The dragons can win wars for you.
Yes.
That's established in the histories, but they can't necessarily produce peace or prosperity or help you rule the nation. Daenerys Targaryen is finding it out in Meereen when she defeats the cities of Slaver's Bay with her 3 dragons. But then in trying to rule as queen, she could destroy Meereen anytime she wants by just unleashing the dragons, kill a lot of people, wipe out the most of the population of the city, reduce the entire city to a fiery inferno. But that doesn't help her come up with good laws or to establish peace between the original inhabitants and the freedmen and the people that she's brought in. So ruling is more than just the power to destroy. And that's a lesson that she's definitely learning.
In this new book, there is a point that the people try to kill the dragons because they want to be free of
Right.
those kings. But then they can't find a leader, and so, well, this is a spoiler. This won't get them anywhere, nowhere. The people, or we, the people, have to learn a lot more about what is around us, just to be free and create some kind of democracy that it's better than the one that we have today?
Well, I think Westeros is still a long way from democratic republic. There's a lot of history that remains to be written, but certainly I try to explore the pluses and minuses, the advantages and disadvantages of the kind of political unrest and even revolution, if you can say, that goes on at certain points in the novels and in the histories. I mean, if you look at the real world, we're considerably more advanced than Westeros is in the books, and we can look back on the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, things that overthrew the ancient regimes of the past, and there's progress there. But there's also, the French Revolution gave us some amazing documents and liberty, equality, fraternity, but it also gave us the terror, and it also gave us Napoleon and his attempted conquest of, all of Europe. So there are dangers. There are dangers as well as advantages. And I try to show these things in all their complexity. You can't and shouldn't simplify these things too much. It's never a case of just heroes, good guys and bad guys.
Good girls or bad girls?
Good girls or bad girls. Yeah, girls can be bad too.
Well, let's talk about the role of the women
Sure.
in your books. We can say that they aren't very powerful. You don't have a lot of powerful women in your books, but they are trying, they are fighting for their place.
Well, Westeros in my novels is, of course, based on medieval Europe, and it's very patriarchal, and there are sharply defined social roles and sexual roles. What's proper for each of the genders. But just as in medieval Europe, there were strong women. Some of them were strong in ways that were considered inappropriate for women, that were typically male roles, women warriors.
Yes.
There weren't a lot of them, but they did exist, and the histories are full of them. Some of them are queens or duchesses or who ruled great, without being a warrior, who ruled a great duchy. People like Eleanor of Aquitaine. Some of them led armies. Some of them occupied traditional feminine roles, as it was considered by the society, but still managed to have great influence over the course of events by one way or another. And I try to show all these different types of things in my novel. I have the advantage of having a very large cast. And I think that's good. Sometimes if you only have a very small cast and you show a woman, and some readers will automatically assume that represents all women. Well, it doesn't.
Okay.
That's one particular character. And I have enough so I can show, yes, here's a strong woman, here's a weak woman, here's a noble, selfless woman, here's a woman who thinks only of herself, Here's a smart woman, here's a stupid woman. The same woman can be smart on Tuesday and stupid on Wednesday, or brave on Tuesday and cowardly on Wednesday. People are complex, and that's true of the men as well as the women.
That's interesting. How do you manage the cast, this cast? Because
With increasing difficulty. Maybe that's why I've slowed down.
do you write biographies for your main characters, for example?
I know the broad strokes. It's in my head, but I do have a cast of thousands, and it is sometimes difficult to keep track of them, especially as I get deeper into the books. I mean, in the early books, many of the characters were together in the same place at the same time, but the adventures of the books, the events of their lives have spread them apart, and they've split up into smaller and smaller groups. So I've reached a point in the narrative where each character is in a different place, surrounded by a whole different supporting cast of friends and enemies and love interests and people who want to kill them, and supporting players, tertiary players, walk-ons. And every time I switch from one character to another, I have to remember all these secondary things. But, I knew the job was dangerous when I took it, so that's my task, and I'm trying to do it as best I can.
What are your literary references? Well, you talked a lot about Tolkien.
Tolkien,
and now
yes.
there's Shakespeare, for example.
Oh, Shakespeare, yes, I love Shakespeare. I first encountered him, of course, as a kid, and then more in college, where I took some Shakespeare courses and read some of. When you're first exposed to Shakespeare as a young person, it's always the same 2 or 3 plays. It's Macbeth and Hamlet and Midsummer's Night's Dream, the biggies. But what really influenced The Song of Ice and Fire is the histories. The Wars of the Roses were a historical event that I've mined heavily, and Shakespeare's versions of the War of Roses, plays like Henry IV and Richard III, Richard II, had enormous influence on me. And also historical novelists, people like Thomas B. Costain, who I've mentioned, or the French historical novelist Maurice Druon, who wrote the Accursed Kings series based on events from French history. That was an influence too.
I don't know if you agree with me, that we are living very interesting times with President Trump
a little
and
too
Brexit.
interesting, yes.
Okay. This does not inspire you?
It depresses me more than anything else. We're living in times that I wish were rather less interesting. But no, if I wanted to write about what was going on in real world politics in 2019, I'd write something that was closer to 2019. It's the politics of the Middle Ages that I'm engaged with now, not the politics of today.
You have never had the hunger in you that wants you to tell to something. Have you never read the book like that? Something has already happened like this. Don't you know what you're heading to?
Oh, no, I feel that all the time. Sometimes I post about that on my blogs. I am a firm believer in, those who do not know history are doomed to repeat it. And you never repeat it exactly, though.
Okay.
And, it's never an exact retread of what it is before. So, but I do see, when I look around today's world, some ominous shadows, some ominous reflections of events of the fairly recent past and of centuries past, and that does alarm me, because they're not good reflections. They're not good times I'm seeing. They're very dark and troubled times, full of conflict, and I hope we can all get past that.
I hope to. Thank you very much.
No, my pleasure. Thank you.
Estas foram algumas de Todas as Palavras, programa especial gravado em Dublin, na Irlanda. Pode ver ou rever este e outros programas na plataforma RTP Play ou na nossa página no Facebook. Estamos de volta na próxima semana. Boas leituras! E para os fãs da Guerra dos Tronos, não desesperem. A primavera está a chegar.
Fronteiras, fronteiras, fronteiras. O nosso mundo.